something had to be done, something that reflected seriousness. But on the other hand, these widows were not in any way, and that may have to do also with the different culture they're coming from, resentful.
So compensation was a great step in the acknowledgement of the harms committed by the Dutch against the Indonesian victims. However, it must also be noted that soon after the payment to the Rawagede widows, about half of this money was taken by village community members, in particular led by a local organization that had itself to represent the survivors of the Rawagede massacre. The widows and family members were oftentimes threatened to hand over the money. The argument of the villagers being that they too had survived due to the massacres committed by the Dutch. Although in Indonesian culture, where the community is considered to be more important than the individual, representatives of the community felt that the money needed to be shared among the community members, and that the widows had only been the voice of all those who had suffered similar atrocities. Then I turn to the impact on the court cases on political and social change. Did the court cases also influence and stir debate in Dutch society and also academia, as well as in Dutch governmental policy and politics? First of all, we looked at the academic and societal debate. And a question that arises is how, for instance, historians value the impact of the court cases, and to what extent the cases also help to establish the historical truth. A Dutch historian who has clearly voiced his views on the impact of the court cases is, for instance, Bart Luttighuis. He has argued that the legal approach as applied in the Dutch East Indies cases confines public debates to single incidents, namely only those cases that are brought to court, instead of thinking about the systematic and comprehensive nature of all the atrocities committed in conflict. He questions whether legally sanctioned apologies do not have adverse effects, namely confining the public debate to specific types of incidents that fall within the parameters of legal responsibility and legal evidence. In his view, the legal approach is rather misleading in terms of providing knowledge about the past, also diminishing the value of the apology due to its forced nature, which diminishes the chance of successful reconciliation. Well, Zegveld, for instance, thinks differently about this. According to her, the debate on the broader picture, the widespread and systematic nature of the crimes committed, has only become a topic of discussion due to the individual cases brought against the Dutch government. Without those trials, nothing would have happened in the first place. Researcher Imler also agrees that the court cases at least forced the Dutch government and society to have a closer look at its own history. And in addition, historian Lindbach states that before the litigation was brought, the Netherlands had provided only non-committal statements about its own past in Indonesia. At least with the outcome of the court cases, they were forced to look at their own past and show the first signs of repentance. So what about the Dutch government on policy and politics? The increased attention to the Dutch colonial past, influenced by, first of all, the Dutch Indies court cases, and secondly, subsequent publications and debates on this topic, compelled the Dutch government in 2016 to reconsider its role and provided funding for additional research into the period 1945-1949. And the fact that a more in-depth research was approved was a breakthrough, as for a long time the Dutch government had rejected such a broad and comprehensive study.
Thank you very much. I would like you to stay there, and I would like to invite you to
for your comments or questions to either Annemarie or Lisbeth or some of our other guests. Yeah, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you for such a really enlightening presentation from the impacts of the litigation of the case itself. My name is Dian Alisan. I come from Conflict and Peace Studies at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. I was wondering about two things. The first one, how about the perpetrators? I mean, we already explained the multidimensional, political, social law itself, but how about the perpetrators? I mean, it will relieve a little bit, but more if it reflects to the, for example, like Tokyo trial or Nuremberg trial, that the first thing they do, they have to conduct a trial about the perpetrator itself. That was the first thing. The second one is all about how the current society in the Rawagede itself, how they feel after this case, after this research that you've been done, that how they feel about the roots of their cultures has been justified and acknowledged by not Indonesian, but by Dutch even. Really good dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, those are two very interesting questions. The first one is about the individual perpetrators. Is that what you mentioned?
Yes.
And the other question is about what's the situation now in Rawagede with respect to the thoughts about the case.
And the second question maybe is something for I mean, it's very. Is it how the decisions landed in the community and how they were taken and
felt about it.
Sorry.
How the community felt about it after you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that has been there's not one answer to you can give to that. I mean, it's of course on individual basis, on a community basis. I mean, Yvonne and Jeffrey, they are better integrated in the communities than we are. What I can say is that Java and South Sulawesi are very different situations. I think Rawagede, we had a bad experience with the force that were the pressure that was exerted on the people to divide their money, to share their money with others. Some have said that had they known this, they would never have started this case at all. I mean, that wasn't a good experience because we have here this individualized court cases, and they have a more collective approach to these things. But we can't translate that into Dutch litigation. It's just this is what we have. I mean, we tried by not going to court, but then once we are in court, the court can't say all together you get this amount. That's not the way it works. So I mean, for me that was really. I mean, you're much more positive on the whole than perhaps I would be. If I look back, there are definitely positive aspects, but there are also negative aspects. With that case, we decided to only continue if the new clients were well informed of the risks they run when they receive money and what money does to such communities. Money is not always a good thing, and they knowingly entered into new cases saying, we want this, if this leads to fights, to pressure, if it disrupts our communities, we still want that. We came up with different solutions, say we can open a fund where you can take the money from and work on projects, or you can, whatever. There were so many options that were available, but they said, no, we want to receive the money and we take all the responsibility for it.
Maar
Jij?
Ik wil toch reageren dat ik, misschien kan je dat even, sorry dat ik geen Engels goed kan spreken. Nou, wat ik eigenlijk wil zeggen, misschien kan je dat voor mij vertalen. Ik vind dat de Nederlandse regering ook debet aan heeft. Want ze wisten het wel, dat deze dingen kan gebeuren.
Welke dingen?
Nou ja, dat het op een gegeven moment, dat het problemen geeft met het geld. Want kijk, minister van Buitenlandse Zaken, met Koenders, die heeft op een gegeven moment 850.000 euro. Nou, als je dat anders hebt dat besteed, dan gaat het misschien anders gelopen. Maar aan de andere kant denk ik ook, het is een gemeenschap. Kijk, als een familie hier overlijdt en hoe noem je dat, de goederen die moeten verdeeld, zelf daar in de familie heb je al ruzie daarover.
Okay.
Actually, just picking up on this as a scholar of Japan and Indonesia myself, but I just wanted to mention that the phrasing in the presentation, I felt a little bit awkward precisely on this point, where I think you were quoting another scholar, that you said, in Indonesian culture where the community is considered to be more important than the individual. This sounds to me quite, as a scholar of Southeast Asia, it strikes me as quite stereotypical, not and kind of culturalist, and some kind of making an assumption about how Indonesians are in general. Where what Jeffrey I think is highlighting here is that this is to a large degree kind of a universal problem. That money, in these kinds of situations, this might, there might be some aspect of something like Indonesian culture here, but I found the wording a little bit too generalizing. I don't know if you might want to comment on that. I mean, it wasn't you, I guess it was the scholar you're quoting, but that struck me as a bit awkward.
Any comments about this? You have a comment, Marlijn.
Let me,
Go
I
ahead.
have to here on
Direct it
Facebook.
Yeah, I listening to all this and also reading the report, I find it, what strikes me is that we are actually zooming in on the result of a struggle, of someone who is fighting historical injustice. I see Jeffrey as a contemporary freedom fighter, and so we are zooming, analyzing the result of his struggle, of the methods that he took. And by doing that, I find that a little bit problematic approach. Why? Because I think that this is more than just discussing if going to court is a right decision. What is at stake is that I see this as a very sad result of a very long history in which now, yes, Jeffrey took the way to go to court. That is a method of raising the issue, putting this on the Dutch agenda. But of course it cannot lead to a fair situation. It can never lead to a really fair situation, because not just the widows that got compensated, but a whole, now currently 260 million Indonesians were affected by the colonial past. So there are not just a few victims that should be compensated. And that is why I think that the discussion about money, whether it has been received well or well, is a little bit, it is, to me it's a bit, it is inherent. I mean, this sort of injustice, it is injustice when you are also a victim of these war crimes and you don't get it, and your neighbor get it, but because she or he met Jeffrey and went to court, we can discuss that injustice, but we should discuss the larger injustice, why all of these people were not actually deserve compensation, in my opinion.
Okay.
So I'm curious to can someone comment from maybe the team or Lisbeth, how do you see the discussion of reparation, colonial reparations, that do not just do justice in individual cases?
You want to broaden the question.
I'm curious
Not just about focusing on this particular litigation, but the question, how to repair colonial
because
damage.
these events are not isolated events in time. They are, as you said, a structural problem. I'm curious.
That's a big question. But maybe, Annemarie, I should give you first the occasion or the opportunity to respond to the comments by Eric. Is it?
Ethan.
Sorry.
Yes.
I was just one of them.
Yes, you were referring to the quote. It was indeed a quote from, I don't know from the top of my head.
Imler.
Imler, I think, yes. I think you're right. I mean, if it's about money, there's always a struggle. It doesn't really matter where you live or where you're from. But I think maybe, indeed, if it's a little bit too strongly articulated, I think the essence is what cements, and that is something that you can sometimes see differences between societies. I think is that in some societies you live more in an individual manner rather than that the community is more part of the family, or how to express it. So I think in the Netherlands we have become a bit more individualized, but that doesn't mean that, of course, we cannot have any quarrels about money, which we certainly have. So I understand your point.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to come at the defense of Imre, because if there's one person who, it may be phrased a bit awkwardly, but if there's one person who knows that anywhere in the world money creates trouble, then it's Nicole. So I just wanted to see.
Okay, I see another hand.
Yeah,
So, thank you.
I want to comment on that comment. It is pretty racist to collectivify all peoples. So you coming in defense for quite a racist way of looking at whole people. I think it's also very problematic. It's not about. It is really about white people again collectivifying Indonesians as all being the same, while individualism here is very important. Why can we not look at the same way to Indonesians as individuals? Why is it used as an argument again after so many centuries of collectivifying Indonesians?
I agree with you, but I did say it's formulated awkwardly.
No, it's not awkwardly, it's formulated racist.
Well, I would call it racist if I'm convinced of the intent.
No, but it's not about intentions. Racism is about impact, not about the intentions that the
Well, we
racist
can have a
makes.
long discussion about this, but I cherish having good faith in the intention of people. So you can have a discussion with someone about, maybe you could phrase it differently, and we close off the discussion if you call someone a racist.
But
so I don't believe
after
that.
525 years of colonialism, oppression, racism, apartheid, genocide, you cannot expect non-white people to see the positive side of the intentions of white institutes. Sorry.
That's not
Okay,
what
but
I
maybe
said.
that's a good. I mean, your comments I think are very a good input in the question that Marjolein put on the table. So what? But that I think is a bit broad for our discussion. Actually, is what do you? How do you repair colonial damage? I don't know whether you want to say something very briefly about that. Would that be possible, or is there anyone else who would like to sort of very briefly say something about that?
I think the Dutch state should recognize and not, as they say, that they regret. No, they sincerely apologize for all atrocities. It could be individual atrocities, but also colonialism, slavery in general. And that they should, whenever there's racism or every other oppression, there's this, you have a couple of stages. One is recognition, two is preventing recidive.
Yeah,
And there is this whole thing of reparations and how reparations are should be. That is the victims to decide. But there is also a big part in the Netherlands that the Dutch should do on reparations. So I think the Dutch state should also put a lot of money in education about colonialism and about crimes and about racism.
Okay, well, I think that's a very useful comment. Dina?
Yeah, I want to actually bring this back to the panel, but also on this topic. So something that I thought was striking about your presentation, but also about Lisbeth's comments about the case, was the potential the case had to increase awareness on the subject and on the atrocities that were committed. And then especially the comment that I think you made that, they started actually teaching in schools the history of what occurred. However, I'm wondering whether, so it seems like the attention is very focused on these specific villages and these specific events, but as we know, the history of colonialism and the Dutch legacy of colonialism expands beyond those villages, beyond Indonesia, to many other colonies, and I'm wondering whether it's such a great thing that this case brought attention to the atrocity and forced the state to recognize and also forced schools and educational systems to educate. But I don't see it yet expanding to outside of that specific case, and I'm wondering whether you see potential for this case leading to an increase of education on the Dutch colonial history and history of slavery and the broader context.
Okay. Does anyone have an answer to that? Nina says, well, do we see any proof of that this case leads or will lead or has led to an increase of educational activity on our colonial past? I mean, that in short is what you're saying, right? And I think maybe there are some people who are involved in this major academic research. Are there any comments on this issue before we go back to our case that we're focusing on today? Okay, that will come later. We're getting very broad. Sorry?
Yeah, the directeur
there are some people of NIOD.
Maybe someone from NIOD should
the director of NIOD, I see in the
Frank.
I don't know what to say about it because I don't hear a specific question. I think what we do is I think what we try to give an answer to as a follow-up of Radiant Impasse research and to give an answer on the political responsibility and the additional responsibility in 1945, 1950 and its aftermath. And I hope we will be able to present a conclusion, and that conclusion will lead to indeed a better knowledge and a better self-reflection also in education. And I think that's the next step after finishing our research.
But that's definitely a result of what has been initiated 10 years ago, and it is definitely a proof of an impact it had on the society. It's quite a big thing. I mean, and these things do not change overnight. It's not something you initiate a court case and in the next 5 years you see a totally different culture and narrative and how we look at this past. So I think, I mean, as far as I can see, Limbach study, NIOD study, they are proof of changes, but it goes very, very slowly. Yeah, that's a matter of fact. And let's see, once you're done, what position the government is going to take on that report, because they will have to come with their reaction.
Okay. I would like to. I would like to stop here with the general discussion. I would like
this is
to.
important. This is important.
Wacht even, er is een excessnota. 1969. Wat gebeurde daarna? Niks.
Yes.
En wij komen met een RAWD en er gebeurt iets. Dus wat?
So, but that is what André also. That's one of the conclusions of the litigation led to studies, which led to the decision.
Nou, het gaat erom dat de Nederlanders zelf niet zeg maar ding wil gaan. Daar gaat het om. Het niet op je hebt gelogen.
Okay, but that's discussion. That's discussion. I don't want to.
Sorry, but
you're speaking.
Okay.
This is important.
Why? I know it's important, but we discuss. We have started.
I understand, but the man over there got the time to speak about the important research that is costing us €4 million and more. And in your analysis, I was also disappointed to find that only in a footnote it was written that Jeffrey Pondag and here Francesca Padipilogli wrote an open letter, criticized everything, the outline, everything from this research, and are still silent today. I didn't see. I mean, you refer to the accessor note of 1969, and that there was someone like Hutting putting this on the agenda. In this time, it is Jeffrey Pondag and KUKB. So we have to use this as a point of analysis. I think that this research is being conducted now, that our government is now spending €4 million. We cannot just say that's a good thing. we have to see what they're doing.
Of
then.
course, but this report is being presented now. The research.
Yeah, but you were in
Yeah,
fact-
sorry. The research has not. We have not seen the research yet.